to the seats. And anyone who's out in the hallways or various places in the building, if they can find their way here. And then if we could get folks to come together closer, because squinch together a little bit more, because we don't want everybody all over the place. So we can have a nice conversation, intimate. Hi, Linda. Hi, Linda. Okay. All right, welcome everyone. Good evening, and welcome to our first Constitutional Conversations Town Hall session. Thank you for being here with us at the Green Room in the War Memorial Veterans Building on this beautiful Friday evening. I am Ralph Remington, Director of Cultural Affairs, and I'll be one of your co-moderators this evening. I'm going to kick it over to my partner in crime tonight, Paul Henderson.
Hey folks, how are you? Thank you guys for being here. This is exactly how we all wanted to spend our Friday night, and I'm super excited about it. Not just because we each get our own microphone. So, my name is Paul Henderson. I am a fourth generation San Franciscan. That's correct. So that makes me like a black unicorn up here. I'm super excited to be here. I'm really excited about the conversations that we're going to be having this evening. And I'm appreciative that so many people want to hear these kind of conversations and shape the lens in which we live our lives and talking about the Constitution, which I think is really super important. And it's one of the things I think after we get out of school that we don't stay as connected to these conversations. And so the fact that we're leading with a level of intentionality to be here and have this conversation is kind of exciting for me. So.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And we are joined by a wonderful group of panelists who we will be introducing in just a few minutes. Before we begin, I'd like to first start out by reading our land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Arts Commission acknowledges that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Now I have some general housekeeping announcements. Please take note of your nearest emergency exits, which can be found to either side of the stage. The same entrances you came into the green room. The bathrooms are located just outside and down the hall. Women's and unisex restrooms are down the left hallway when exiting the green room, and the men's restroom is down the right hallway. So a little bit about tonight. Tonight's town hall conversation is a part of a national activation by Race Forward, Americans for the Arts, and the World Cities Culture Forum during the inaugural Cultural Week of Action for Race and Democracy, taking place September 27th through October 5th, 2024. The Constitutional Conversation Series is an opportunity for the city to host intergenerational conversations that engage San Francisco youth, artists, community members, and city leaders, exploring the meaning of the U.S. Constitution and its purpose, value, meaning, and impact, and explore the wider concept of culture, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Tonight's discussion will be centered around the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It is now my pleasure to introduce the panelists for tonight's session. We will go down the table, and each panelist will introduce themselves and what they do and why they're here, and then we will move forward. So to my left is...
Hello?
Yep.
Hello? Well, good afternoon. I'm Chuck Collins, and I too am a native of San Francisco, and the fourth generation of our family are my two grandchildren who live right here in the city. So we've raised our family here, and our grandchildren are being raised here. My parents came here as a part of the Great Migration to win the war in the 1940s. And so we established ourselves in San Francisco in that environment where the Japanese had been sent to internment camps. And yes, we lived in the Fillmore Western Addition. But as boys, the Japanese came home, and we all grew up together in a community that was whole, but also dealing with major parts that were broken and needed repair. I found my way into the world of art because, I was privileged to have a lot of that around me as a child, and it became one of my advocacies as I matured. But I sit today as the president of the San Francisco Arts Commission, which is the official agency representing the cultural assets of San Francisco. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Dennis. I am the chairman of the San Francisco Republican Party. I have been a San Francisco resident since 1991. Someone to my left beat me by 1 year. I have long been a staunch advocate for First Amendment protections, and of course the following with good faith, the Constitution. Had the good fortune to live overseas. I've been in about 70 countries, and lived in Europe for 4 years. And the differences in this country you can find in the roots of not just the Constitution in general, but the Bill of Rights is a unique thing that we have, and it has made us the special country that we are. So looking forward to a lively discussion.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. I'm MAHSA HAKIMI. I'm the one who beat him by 1 year. So this is not my home of origin, but home of choice. And I've been here ever since I moved over here. And I love this city for the reason that it has allowed me to be all that I am in one place at the same time. So I'm an Iranian-American lesbian woman, a lawyer, the Art Commissioner of the City of San Francisco, longtime activist for the LGBTQ and women's rights. And as I sit here, this is the only space, and I travel a lot around the world, and I've lived in Iran and a couple other places. But it's the only place that I can tell you that I can be all of those at the same time, and I don't have to censor any of that. So this is a very interesting conversation about censorship and the issues of free expression and freedom of speech. So just by being who I am in this city, I feel very privileged that I can be sitting at this table with all these amazing people today.
Good evening. My name is Roberto Ordenana, and I too have the blessing and the privilege to have been born and raised here in San Francisco. My family immigrated from Nicaragua in Central America in the late 60s. As a gay young man, I finally found my voice and a sense of community and a sense of safety through arts and culture and arts education, particularly in theater. I've dedicated my life's work to really building our LGBTQ communities, the intersections of economic justice and community and arts and culture. and health and healing. Today, I am the proud executive director of the GLBT Historical Society Museum and Archives, and I was the past president of the San Francisco Arts Commission, and having served on the commission for about 10 years was an incredible honor, and it's so wonderful to be here today on this panel with all of you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nancy Tung. I am what I consider myself to be a naturalized citizen of San Francisco, having lived here for more than 2 decades, and both of my children having been born here. I am a prosecutor by profession, but I'm also the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party. I was newly elected in April of this year. I think that the conversation around the First Amendment is important for many reasons, some of which have been already discussed in our introductions, but there is a real intersection between the First Amendment speech, what crosses the line into criminal behavior, why political speech is important, and the safeguards our Constitution affords us. And I do think that in these times that we're living through, we need to find some real balance between irresponsible speech and that which is protected. And I'm looking forward to that conversation tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for the evening. You can clap. So there you go. Here you go. Now, I am a lawyer, but you will note that not everyone on the panel is a lawyer. And so we wanted to have a broad diversity of thoughts and opinions that get presented to you this evening. And I think that that's exactly what you're going to hear. And you've heard about some of the backgrounds that we have on the panel. I'm really excited about these conversations that we're about to have regarding the Constitution. I will say, just to start the conversation, one of the things that stands out to me about the Constitution, and I'm going to read the Constitution for you. I'm not, really. I saw you guys are just like, is he really about to read the Constitution? But I will read the first few words, which is "we the people." And I only articulate that because I think what's really important about the Constitution and what it aimed to do was to shift the power away from the states into the hands of the people. And then building that republic, that's exactly why the Constitution started that way, trying to interpret and empower the people, and that is all of us. And I think it's a good reminder as we begin the conversation that this is who we are, the people, and that the rules and regulations and the lens in which the Constitution is built is there to empower us. It's there so that our perspectives are reflected in this country. And I know we're going to talk a lot about, we can start off, I think is a great place to start off, because I think a lot of people here have some really strong opinions about First Amendment. And before we jump in, I just want to acknowledge in interpreting First Amendment and freedom of speech. But we also know that freedom of speech is also freedom of religion, press, assembly, petition, and petition is to conflict or request from the government. I promise I'm not going to give a whole legal outline here for you and make a lecture, but I love that we are having this conversation in the context of this building where we are surrounded by so many expressions. It's not lost on me that we are approaching the constitutional conversation in a panel that is convened in large part by the Arts Commission. And so I want to acknowledge that, and I want to thank the leadership, specifically with Ralph, of initiating a conversation like this. Yeah. Where the freedoms of expression are all around us and in this building. And that intentionality of having music, of having poetry, of having art and movement, and these conversations all at the same time is a fantastic backdrop for the conversation that we are about to have as we define what our culture is and how culture gets exhibited, presented, and restricted based on constitutional interpretations. And so with that, I'm going to jump in and ask, I'll start off, I think, with Chuck, This is one of the things that we were talking about earlier, some of the differences that we see interpreting First Amendment restrictions and constitutional rights here in the United States versus what we've seen outside of the United States.
Well, thank you for that question. It's a note of irony that we are in the building where the Charter of the United Nations was signed in July of 1945, 79 years ago. I mean, this is a significant hallmark in the world, right? In this building, in Herbst Theater, the Charter of the United Nations was signed. And why was San Francisco chosen as the place for this? We had just had this huge international exhibition. We had really declared that we were a part of the future of this part of the world. You know, looking towards our indigenous history into Mexico and looking north into our indigenous histories of all of our Americans that came here first, but also looking west to Asia, right? So this is an important place, and FDR chose this place for the UN Charter to be signed. Right not after that was the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know, what a concept coming out of a world war, that we sign a United Nations and it's followed by a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These are the things upon which our constitutional principles have been founded. Some people even call that natural law. We have to be always careful about that. But there is something that is above all of us, and that is something called human rights. And how we have chosen to codify that and to be able to put the articulation, the guardrails, the ways in which we can really interpret and enforce these fundamental notions of human rights within a world that is looking towards peace. And so the ability to speak, the ability to have artistic expression is fundamental. And Paul and I were talking about it in the corridor. You know, the opposite of what we are facing in this world today are regimes where free speech has been shut down. I lived in Greece when I was just out of college during the time of the colonels. And you're coming out of histories of Theodoricus and Kazantzakis. Those people were censored under the Greek junta. We face those same questions here in America right now about censorship. And what does that mean? And who are the censors that are telling whomever what they can and cannot read? And where is knowledge really sitting in that whole ecosystem? I have lived in a place, the cradle of democracy, at least Western democracy, where significant authors and artists were censored. I experienced that as a young man, and I always vowed to fight that. And so, Paul, when we're looking at regimes, you know, I'm reading just a book, and I want to be careful about not going on too long, but I'm reading about the history of the founding of the Museum of Modern Art. Thomas Aiken has written this book, and we're looking at, you know, at the time of the founding, some of the most important collections of what was considered modernist art, Monet's, Matisse, Picasso, was held in Russia, right? If you look at the Russia of today, are they really creating that type of art that we can really say is truly expressive of the free speech and the freedom of ideas that these modernist painters were expressing? So I think those are the sorts of guardrails, Paul, that I just wanted to call out, and now I'll leave it back to you.
Ralph, can I pull you into this? Because
Yeah.
I think as we're talking about those guardrails, and to me that's kind of moving towards censorship, but before we get into those areas, I kind of want to expand a little bit more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the definition of what those communications are, specifically in First Amendments, where we're talking about how we seek, receive, or impart ideas. And in your role as the leader of arts here in San Francisco, how do you interpret that approach in terms of your role and what you see going on?
Oh, thank you, Paul. I think, first of all, I'm it's important to say that I'm the first African American to lead the Arts Commission in 92 years when I was. And I don't say that as an applause line. I think that's kind of shameful, right? And it's like it shouldn't be special. It shouldn't be a special thing, and it shouldn't have taken this long. And I think that in my role, when I have these roles that I'm an advocate or a leader of cultural sectors in these cities that I've been in, I take it especially. I think it's especially important as a member of a historically marginalized and disenfranchised group to particularly focus on the lack of censorship, on making sure censorship is not a real thing, is not a thing that impedes people's lives. And if I see that, and if I am experiencing that, or other people or artists in the communities that I serve are experiencing that, it's important for them to let me know, let our commission know, so that I can stand up for them in the name of the people. It's not me, it's the Arts Commission, and it's my charge, it's my job in the name of the people to provide a platform for those people to have their voices heard. Because that's what's guaranteed us in the United States of America, despite book banning and all the things, craziness that you see right now in the country. It's a country that I don't recognize right now. I don't recognize the place that we're in right now. I'll tell a little story, and then I'll kick a question out to the rest of the panel. But when I was in 7th grade, I led my class. Go back a little bit. When I was in 7th grade, I saw a PBS special on the Chicago 7 trial and Bobby Seale when he was gagged in the Chicago 7 trial. And I thought, this is the United States of America. I was going to a little ghetto school in Philadelphia, in the hood, and I had teachers that believed in God and country and everything else. But I said, why are we standing up for this national anthem? Why are we standing up for this Star-Spangled Banner when it doesn't stand up for us? So I went in the next day and I led my entire class to sit down on the national anthem and the Star-Spangled Banner in assembly. Now that was unheard of back in those days, but I did it. Now, as you know, any of you who have led protests or been a part of protest movements before, you might go to the wall with 100 people, but by the time you get to that wall, you might only have 30 people. So by the time I got to that wall, I only had 8 kids that stood firm and remained seated. And we all went to detention, and in that detention, the teachers told us, you will live a long time, hopefully, and you will go all over this world, and you will see that this country is the best country on earth, no matter what. And I'm here to say that I have gone all over the world, I have lived in a lot of countries, and I felt freer in Western Europe than I ever felt in the United States of America. And I'm just here to say that, from my own personal opinion, because I felt as if that they saw me as a person. I was American first, and black was the cherry on top. In America, I'm black first, and that's it. You're not American. You don't feel like you're American. At least I didn't feel like I was American because I felt like I was invisible growing up in Philadelphia. Ironically, the seat of democracy. So with that, I'm going to pass it out to the rest of the panel and say, why is it crucial for marginalized people to tell their own stories without censorship? And I want to kick that to Roberto.
Thank you so much, Ralph. You know, I mean, I will say this, like, we have seen hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of anti-LGBT legislation introduced into state houses across the country over the last several years. And these are systemized attacks against some of the most vulnerable people in our LGBTQ community, in particular, trans and gender non-binary children and young people. some of the most vulnerable people in our community. These attacks include bans on pride flags, right? A pride flag, which was an artistic symbol that Gilbert Baker, and along with his contemporaries, created here in San Francisco for the 1978 Pride Celebration Committee. They are bans on books. They are, bans on information, bathroom access. I mean, come on, right? And they're using their tired old rhetoric from the past, right? And what are we gonna do about that? Honestly, whatever happens in this election in the fall, regardless of what happens, that hate and that vitriol is going to be out there. And the only way that I personally think that we're gonna get through that is by continuing to invest in intersecting mobilization, the ability to see how the fact that anti-LGBTQ legislation is directly tied to the fact that these extremists are also advancing the fallacy of white supremacy. And we've got to work as communities like never before in an intersectional way to ensure that we're talking about, the rollbacks on reproductive rights and that we reverse that, right? The attacks against our queer community, the attacks against people of color and Black and Indigenous people in this country still. It's not going to be one solution. It's not going to be, a walk in the park. It's going to be all of us working together, and making a lifelong commitment to dismantling the systemic oppression. Sadly, we're not going to see the day when it's over, but we know that we are going to keep working and make it a little bit better for generations of people that come after us.
Toss it to you, Paul.
I love that you brought up the censorship and the bans, and those are things that are typically regulated often regionally, and obviously we have laws outlining what those restrictions are. What I think is really interesting is some of the places that are site-specific, where we're seeing some of those censors, where we're seeing some of those bans. And you talked about an educational approach. I'd love to bring in MAHSA to ask you about your opinion, specifically in educational forums, where we're seeing restrictions in different regions about interpretations of art, about interpretations of right, about interpretations of gender that's happening right now.
Thank you so much for that question. So I'm a lawyer, and by virtue of being a lawyer, I have some knowledge of the Constitution and the First Amendment, but just a little bit more than an average person. I'm not a scholar by any means, but I am also an activist and have been an activist all of my life. My activism started in my 20s as I was coming out post-AIDS epidemic. And I had just moved here a few years before that from Iran. So I had, today I might look at it as a privilege, at the time really a curse, to have lived through a time where we took a very wrong turn, where people's movement became an authoritarian government of religious right. So I have personally lived the experience of what it means to be in what we consider a free democratic nation, which is the United States of America, and live in an authoritarian government state, religious rights state, in which, just being a woman by virtue of that is an apartheid, you are an apartheid state. These days, it's really hard personally for me, because while all the identities that I have, as a Middle Eastern, as an Iranian, as a woman, as a lesbian, as an immigrant, every single day, one of these identities is being told that I don't have the right to exist, that my existence is a challenge to everybody else's, right and existence, basically. The interesting thing about it is I'm sitting these days and I'm watching the systematic censorship that's taking place in this country. And I had made a choice early on in my life as an activist to always have art as part of my activism, because to me art is a intersectional language of humans. It brings emotions out in which people can relate to. Also, it's the only way we actually record our history. If you go back in history of humanity, the only way we know what we were is because of somebody did some artwork somewhere on a cave somewhere, right?
As a former politician, I understand, as former city council member in the city of Minneapolis. And in the political realm, what's the difference between hate speech and just freedom of expression?
Well, that's a big question, right? So, I mean, I'll say that from my perspective in my day job as a prosecutor, there's a very clean line where speech goes into threats, because threatening people, making them fearful for their lives of their family members over a sustained period of time, that is illegal, and that is not protected speech. But hate speech isn't always illegal. And, I think that is part of the way that our Constitution is meant to be, that if you talk about not wanting to censor people, then you can't decide that you censor them just because you don't like what they have to say. So if somebody is going to, in their own personal freedom, say that they don't like another group of people, they can sit in that hate themselves. They can express it to their neighbors. But then when they cross a line into criminal speech, and criminal hate speech, that's where our Constitution no longer protects them. But as you said, this kind of speech in the political space, even if it doesn't cross into what's illegal, you have to ask yourself, like, what does it contribute to the conversation? And I think it's up to our political leaders to help moderate the discussion among the people of a particular political party, and to actually model that so that we can get to a place where we have more civilized discussions about what the policy issues are, even if we disagree, that we're not attacking people based on the way they look or who they love or what religion they practice, but we actually get into the meat of what are the issues in our society. When you have hate speech, I think people throw up barriers. You're not able to have those conversations. And when our leaders don't try to stop that or denounce it, it cheapens the political dialogue, and that hurts us all.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And I just, by the way, also want to thank the Commission for hosting this event. This is a really critical issue to discuss. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to do that. I want to thank the audience for being here, for caring about this issue. So many people are caught up in other issues and things these days that we sometimes look past the First Amendment, the one that matters. The reason they put it first is because it gives us the freedom to speak. We were talking about guardrails earlier, and now we're talking about hate speech, and it's a really tricky, delicate matter. In 1969, the Supreme Court heard the Brandenburg versus Ohio case. In it, they made a very clear definition as to what the limits were on speech, and it specifically is incitement and violence. Beyond that, there is no restriction on speech. As a defender of free speech, I've done it myself, and I hope many of you have as well. have fought against the most odious, awful speech that would be hurtful to people because you defend free speech. It's what makes this country different. It's what helped grow this country. Nothing begins if the government is censoring what you may say. Scientific inquiry is not possible. Artistic expression is not possible. Education is not possible if you are constantly worried about whether or not you're offending the government. The government has the authority over the use of force, and to have that hanging over you is absolutely awful. Again, the most important thing you can do if you're a free speech warrior is take inspiration from the parade in Skokie, Illinois in the 80s, where neo-Nazis marched through Skokie, an area which had the densest population of Holocaust survivors. And they were defended by the ACLU, largely by Jewish lawyers, because they understood what was at stake. The worst speech, the speech that can make you feel the worst and offend lots of people, that's what we've got to defend. So we have to be very careful about guardrails. We have to be very careful on letting the government outsource restrictions of speech by having backdoor relationships with social media companies, something that's been exposed over the last few years. This is a really dangerous area. And so that relationship between government and tech is something that we have to, if we are free speech defenders and we want to see ourselves as fighting against the odious speech, we also have to fight against the government influencing companies that can restrict your speech.
We talked about that, and I love that this context is going up around hate speech and what kind of speeches are restricted. And just as a reminder, because I want to shift it into something that Roberto, you were talking about, what those classifications are for protected classes, which are age, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, disability, and condition, the condition being things like pregnancy. But I'm curious now what your thoughts are, Roberto, because you talked about your day job and the work that you do and some of the issues like sexual orientation and how that can be interpreted, or a problem now that may be different here in San Francisco versus in other parts of the country. You alluded to it, I think, when you talked about some of the other legislation that's been pending in other areas. Where do you see those conversations going next?
You know, during the day, I get to work with incredible historians and curators and archivists who, you know, together we truly believe that, you know, lifting up, preserving, lifting up, exhibiting, and creating greater access to our queer history has never been more important, right? We can't learn how we want to design the world that we so desire and so deserve to live in without looking at the past, right? And so, you know, I will say this is an incredible city, right? This is a city that really values diversity and values the opportunity to lift people up. I think we see that because of the grassroots work that has been done in San Francisco by so many activists and so many community leaders and so many organizations that, you know, are providing, you know, the most important direct services for, you know, some of the most disenfranchised community members, which also include the LGBTQ community. You know, I was born and raised in San Francisco, but it was also really hard growing up here as a young queer man. Like, I didn't, you know, I experienced a lot of bullying, and this was in the 90s. Like, and so we understand that even in a beautiful, supportive environment like the Bay Area and here in San Francisco, the work is not done. Like, there are people struggling on the streets right now. You know, obviously, when you don't have community support, when your history isn't reflected, right, in the textbooks that you're reading as a kid, you're not likely to be able to graduate from high school, and so you end up, you know, not having a job, and you end up being homeless. Like, we here in San Francisco understand that, you know, over 30% of the homeless folks that are living, the unhoused people that are living in San Francisco, are LGBTQ in particular. right? And so we've got to do the work in our own backyard. We've got to still, continue to lift up the most marginalized in our communities in San Francisco and create deeper investments, in arts and culture organizations, in people that are doing the work day in and day out.
Perfect. I think we're gonna.
Yep. I'm gonna tee Chuck up with a question here. And then this is the last question with the panel, and then we're going to move it out to the audience and get some of your thoughts. So Chuck, I know you sat on the Monuments and Memorials Advisory Committee for the San Francisco Arts Commission for the city, appointed by the mayor, and to examine our policies of public art and what policies that we should have as we look at what monuments should be in our public realm. What are your thoughts about monuments and memorials and free speech?
Oh, what a question, and it's still a work in progress, right? Our monuments and our memorials have to be differentiated. We often think of them as one phrase, but they are in fact different. And if we look at two of the most emblematic monuments and memorials in our country, let's think about the Washington Monument. It was a monument to a new nation, the notion of this democracy, the notion of our free speech, our Bill of Rights, what we fought for to fight imperialism, that we would not have an established king. George was a king. That George, our George, was a president. So it was a monument to a new nation, an idea of democracy that is still unfolding and still very tender in its expression. Right across the reflecting pond is the Lincoln Memorial. It is about grief. It is about how this nation fought within itself a civil war to try to find what a just path would be going forward. A monument is different from a memorial. But many of the things that we see as monuments in our city are in fact memorials. Because time has a way of bringing a larger framework of interpretation. At the time, people probably think they're doing the right thing, but one of the things that we know is that most of the monuments to the Confederacy were built in the 1940s during the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And therefore, they're emblems of power. To take them down is to confront a very difficult history and a very difficult current situation. And so, we've had this opportunity to examine our monuments and our memorials and to understand what are they celebrating or what are they memorializing. Right across the plaza, the Pioneers Monument. It's not called a memorial, but one of the elements of it was an offending figure about the oppression of our indigenous histories. And while many people would think that that's okay to walk by, there was no interpretation. It's sitting there as an unsolved issue. And so if you are a part, or if you're empathetic to the histories of our indigenous, we talk about this. What is it like to have that element in what is called a monument to our pioneers? And so we have to re-examine these. We need to have interpretation. One of the things that, as Ralph was talking about, the first time that I visited Dachau was in 1967. I was a curious then teenager. Well, maybe I'd turned 21. But I went to Dachau because I wanted to see what had happened that was at least in some place that I could see. And it was the beginning of a memorial. A lot of what happened there was beginning in its interpretation. I took my wife back there 5 years ago. In 1967, there was a little map. These camps happened sort of like here. And then when you go back today and you go to Dachau, and I've been to probably 11 concentration camps, you see the pervasive nature of Nazism as practiced on Jewish people and other marginalized people in a society at large, because Germany is willing to tell that truth. And so this is why it's an ongoing exercise. and a responsibility that we have to really understand our histories and not to bury them. Because a part of the argument when we remove something is erasure. But it's not forgotten. And it's still in the histories and the epigenetics of the people and all of us who are empathetic with each other. And so it's a work in progress. And I really encourage you to stay involved in things like that, because this is our civic collection. It's what we stand for in San Francisco. And I don't want to go on too long, but one of the things that I've noticed is that histories can end. We've had this long experiment with democracy, this fragile thing that we continue to try to nurture. But histories can end. And I would wonder, are we in that dilemma right now, where the history of this country, as we know it, has the potential of coming to an end? Ralph?
I will thank you, Chuck, for those eloquent words. I am going to toss it to Paul, and we're going to take it to the audience.
Exactly. What I'd like to do is open this up now, so those of you that may have specific questions, you have a number of great people up here, and I know some of you have come with questions that we'd like to answer and be able to share with you. If you could stand. Linda, thank you for being here.
Well, Linda almost doesn't need any mic.
Well, thank you, everyone, today. My name is Linda Fediki Richardson. I'm an immigrant, and I have lived in San Francisco for decades and very active, involved. I know everybody here. It struck me, Mr. Chuck Collins reminded us about the historical significance of this room. It cannot set the stage for all these conversations. And as every of the panelists were speaking, my mind kept going to that. And it took 92 years for this great city, with all the historical significance, to have an African American to be the executive director of the Arts Commission. And it took someone, I'm mayor, consciously thinking about, I'm here, this has never happened. Do we even pause to give kudos or credit to that? And I remember it was Mayor London Breed that hired you. And here we are today talking about an important topic that the Republican gentleman says are hard questions that we really need now to take on the road, even though this discussion is supposed to be for X amount of time. I think because of the crisis in the country, we need to continue this stuff. Because as an immigrant, where I see the censorship that Mr. Paul Henderson says, and this country is not the country that, when I came out here from Africa and whatever, because it stood for something. But it seems right now that other country is going to be teaching this country something strange is happening. And so the relevance of what you are talking about today should not end in just 5 days because you have just opened a can of worms. If you are going to be saving San Francisco, and what San Francisco does has relevance, a semblance with what goes on in the country. With the mind that are here, we better start that right now before things fall apart. And for me to close, I want to also bring to your attention the diversity of San Francisco. How do we, in the context, justify that the African-American population is being gentrified? So we started with the African-American population, and you think that the LGBTQ community is going to stay here? No, because if you look at the census and the data, they are going as well. The Hispanics, it's happening because it does not just stop. And so how we have been able to make all the progress, and then you see things reversing back. That's what is happening. If you go along San Francisco, you hardly see what led to their gentrification. Where are we right now going to sound the alarm that say, hey, wait, something is happening, it's not right? Because we may be oblivious to that or think the other way, but every visitor to San Francisco, they ask the question, what happened? So thank you again for this great and wonderful panelists here.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. I'm going to come down. I'm going to do my Oprah thing. So you guys have been listening to this conversation, and Paul and I are just fan out among you guys and find out what's on your minds. Do you have any questions? You've heard the panelists all speak. Do you have any questions for the panelists? Do you have any statements you want to make yourselves? And I want to just put some guardrails, just a few in place. If someone says something you don't necessarily agree with, we don't want to like vociferously boo or hiss anyone. We just want to speak in I statements, and we don't want to like attack people for their own opinions. So that way everybody feels this is a safe space that they can articulate their truths. All right, sir.
I was going to help you out.
Sorry. Good. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, my question would be for you.
Oh, sure.
Thank you for sharing your experience and the way you felt in Europe. And that made me think of like an Algerian or a Turk's experience in America would be similar to your experience in Europe. And in that same token, a Kabylia from Algeria or a Kurd in Turkey would have different experiences. That brings me to the question where American exceptionalism, being someone who were brought up abroad, that has always been something for me to struggle with. And I can feel different panelists have different opinions about American exceptionalism. In your opinion, does the Constitution and the First Amendment specifically put America in a more exceptional place in the world? Or is this a narrative that Americans love to tell each other, themselves, that looking at their long enough history does not get them to the final result? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's an interesting question. I'm going to put that to our panel. Nancy looks like eager to answer that one.
So, you know, I still get a little starry-eyed when I think about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because as someone who studied it in law school, and I got a new mic, so now I can talk longer. No, I do. There's something about the ideals behind which these documents were created to preserve freedom, and freedom irrespective of who you are or where you came from. But if you're in the United States, these documents protect you. And you know, it's one thing to think about it in the abstract, but when you talk about it in a global sense. So my father and mother came from a country called Taiwan. They grew up under martial law their entire lives until they immigrated to the United States. And the ruling government at the time that they were growing up was very oppressive, and it controlled the people and the land by taking away their freedoms, took away their land, took away their ability to protest, took away, through fear, intimidation, and the military, even people's desire to choose careers in law or politics or medicine, things that might be considered people who would be free thinkers against the government. And I did not know this about my father's history, but until I was an adult and a practicing lawyer for several years. He talked about how he was really interested in pursuing politics and studying politics and law when he was trying to choose his educational path, but his father forbade it because he wanted to keep his child safe. And if you decided to study law or politics, you were putting a target on your back as far as the government was concerned. And thinking about that, when my father told me about that story, I had a memory of when, you know, I was probably I was probably a preteen, but he was going back to Taiwan. And one of the things when he was going to go home was to march in a protest for democracy there. And he was so proud of his American passport. And he told us, I'm going to go march in the streets of Taipei and hold my American passport in front of me, because that will protect me. And so this idea about, well, we have these documents and they're the foundation of our government, they're the foundation of our law, it's more than that, because it has the ability to protect us even when we are abroad. And this is one of the things that makes me really proud to be an American, is the fact that we are in a place where we can have speech against the government and not fear reprisal, not fear imprisonment. Although I guess some people would disagree with me. But I do think that it is exceptional. It is exceptional in the world, the way that our systems of government are set up and these documents protect us. And to the extent that, like Linda said, we live in these strange times, and it feels like the world is changing, or it feels like the country is changing. What that means is that if you feel like the country is changing in a way that you don't agree with, then that's your call to action. It's that our country does not exist in a vacuum. It is the sum of our parts. It's the sum of people who are in our country, and how you use your voice in a way to promote either the way that you think about the world and the world that you want to live in, or to help uplift somebody else who doesn't have that privilege. That is what I think our political process is about. It's about coming together to change society and the world in the way that you want to see it. And so I encourage all of you, if you feel like democracy is at stake in this election, I encourage you to get involved. Find a place, ask a person, ask me after this panel is done. But I will tell you where to go and what to do if you want to make a change in the society you have.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to. Thank you. Yeah, the applause is good. And it looks like John wanted to say something, and so I want to toss the mic to you, John, before we take it back to the audience.
Oh, thanks. American exceptionalism, actually it's a phrase that came from de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. He came to America to see what was it that made this country different. It's an unfortunate word, I think. I wish he'd used the word unique, because I think American exceptionalism has been hijacked in many circumstances to justify sort of adventurism, if we will, to be generous. So, we are, in sort of a cultural sense, we are exceptional. We create exceptional things because of the roots that were established in the 18th century. It's interesting, we were talking about Europe and your experience in Europe and my own. The ideas of this country were founded in Europe, where we decided, okay, these forms of government we have, we are subjects, but what we're going to make the sovereign is the individual. And that's what the Constitution's aim is to respect the rights of the individual. And it's always important to remember that the Constitution assigns responsibility for activities in the government, in the federal government, but it also restricts it. So many restrictions in the federal government. We've had an expansive view, and I think some of the roots of the problems that we face are in that expansionism, those expansive interpretations of parts of the Constitution. The issue that we're talking about here is that when we talk about censorship, there's no such thing as private censorship. It's government censorship that is the most critical. That's the thing that because they serve a unique function in society where they have the monopoly of the use of force, and you combine that force with putting restrictions in speech, and that's where I'm concerned about the future of our country that Chuck mentioned earlier. One little note I do want to make, by the way. This country survives and thrives and continues to thrive to the extent that we allow ourselves to have opposing points of view. You talked about the UN Charter being signed in this building. I don't know if it's just a quirky coincidence or part of the urban poetry of San Francisco. However, within a 3-wood shot from here, now that I'm older, it's a 3-wood, is the Hiram Johnson building at 455 Golden Gate, where we have our meetings. Hiram Johnson holds several distinctions, one of which was that he served as the governor of California and a senator from California. But he also holds the unique distinction of being the one person who voted against joining the League of Nations and joining the United Nations. And I think there's some poetry in the fact that his building, the net named after him, is with the eye line and eyesight of this building where the UN Charter was signed.
Thank you, John. I will toss it to Paul.
We got one more question back here.
My name is Angel. I use he, she, they pronouns. I have the great honor of being the director of BATES, the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits. And thank you for not starting this off with a line acknowledgement, but instead supporting indigenous vendor and providing Webapa with the opportunity to feed us. That is how you replace or go beyond land acknowledgement, by actually doing something, putting an action piece on it. I think that the First Amendment, in my experience as an indigenous immigrant, is super selective because of the spheres of influence. Especially, I'm referring now to San Francisco. We were one of the few organizations that took a bold step and put out a statement around the situation around Palestine. And I know that colleagues of mine, other executive directors, almost lost their jobs if they ventured in that direction. How we were able to justify it for ourselves and our community was that, unlike any other communities, we know the effects of genocide. We live it on a daily basis. We live with historical trauma. We are still in reservations. We are still homeless in our own land. And so, so I think that going back to the selective piece, because I know that because we took a stand, now we are not in the great favors of folks with a lot of power in this city. And so, although we can, do the freedom of expression, that also comes with consequences. And more in communities with less access to power, unfortunately, sometimes get the worst brunt of that.
Thank you. I see Michael War has a question. Going to come over here.
Thank you. Yeah, this is more of a statement, but there's an aspect of this question of censorship that I think more noise needs to be made about, and that is not so visible. And that is self-censorship that really takes place within the artistic community. But there's not headlines about that. The artists tend to keep it to themselves. I've been invited to recite, I'm a poet myself, and I've been invited to recite at an event coming up in October called Poets for Palestine. And I know of other writers who have been asked to participate or to, for instance, respond to a mural on the issue that don't want their name associated with it, not because of their position, but more because of what potential repercussions there might be. I was commissioned to write a poem in response to a mural in Clarion Alley This was during the pandemic. And that mural, which I was assigned to write on, there were 16 artists, 16 poets who were asked to respond to 4 different murals in Clarion Alley, and you were assigned which one you would respond to. So I was assigned the Arab Liberation mural, or a mural called The Will to Live. And that was part of a series of events and publications, and it was really well done. But when it got to the point of a public event being done, all of a sudden there was controversy over one particular mural, and that is the Will to Live mural. The other murals were not, there was no question about them. But on that particular mural, which I happened to be one of the 4 poets to respond to, there was an issue. And it became an issue that was covered in the press. But it was a form of censorship being imposed upon those artists. And the kind of tactic was to say, well, could you leave out this one mural and these 4 poets and that one visual artist who created that mural, but the other 3 murals, you can do it, that's okay. So divide and conquer. Well, of course, that was not going to happen. So I just want to make the point that this week I've been engaged in this conversation with a few people who are considering self-censorship, and I think that's really important for us to know is happening and is out there. And I was looking up the term, the canary in the coal mine, because I was thinking, artists could be the canary in the coal mine. So I decided to look it up and see what it actually means. And because if it means that the canary dies, well, I don't want to be that. But what it points out is that canaries are particularly sensitive to carbon monoxide. And that's why they use them in the coal mines. And one of the indicators that something's wrong is when the canary stops singing. So that makes sense to me as an artist, that we have to keep singing, but we also sing about what's happening in our environment. So I just want us to pay attention to that aspect of censorship as well.
Thank you. We have a question?
Comment, maybe a question, as I think through my thoughts. Evan Glenn. As a black man, growing up in America, growing up in Oakland, freedom of speech obviously has always been, my right. But as a black man, you're not always heard, right? So even though you have the freedom to say what you want, speak out, people don't always hear you. So I spent a lot of time working on how to articulate my words to where they resonate with as many people as possible, right? And I did that because I wanted to be heard. I felt like I had something to say. So I guess my question to the panel is, what's more important? Knowing that there's a law somewhere that says that you have the freedom to speak out, or having the feeling to refuse to not be heard?
And we have a couple of minutes for this, and we are going to unfortunately have to wrap up soon. It went that fast. So, panel.
I see MAHSA itching.
Thank you. May I take this one?
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank the audience for actually raising issues that in many rooms I go to these days nobody wants to talk about. That is a self-censorship. We are not going to shift and change. What we're just basically doing is replacing another marginalized community with somebody else. And to answer your question with respect, that's what makes America great to me, who has lived in Iran. I'm Iranian and an American. And I want to tell you the difference is that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and I actually believe that. I didn't believe that when I was told that. What makes a difference is actually the people, we the people, is very important. The question that we need to keep coming back to is that we, the people, should be inclusive. And time has shown in this country that as we have evolved, that has also evolved. We are sitting at a very difficult moment, not just in this country, on a global level. The misinformation, the meanness, the unkindness, the atrocities, I don't even know every day, I don't even know what to deal with anymore. But what's really coming back to, I want to say that you actually raised the issue I was going to talk about, I never got to talk about. We talk about censorship as this governmental censorship, which is part of the issue. But the real impact of censorship is actually in society and in ways in which we actually allow people to be visible. When you make them invisible, you take away their humanity, you minimize their trauma, you give preferences to others' traumas, or you hold differently. That is the worst kind of censorship. So I, these days, invite people to actually get uncomfortable in the conversations and allow people to share. Because the only way we are going to survive this and we are going to keep our democracy is to actually have the hard conversation and engage. If we do the thing that we have been doing, which is just be polarized and not listen to the other side, that will definitely be the end of this democracy as we understand this country. So.
Thank you, MAHSA. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. And so we have a few minutes left. I want to, as we wrap up, first of all, I want to thank my co-moderator, Paul Henderson, for being here with me and helping plan this. I want to thank all of the panelists that were here today. I want to thank you, the audience, for coming and joining us tonight. That was so wonderful to see you. These are important. I want to thank the many staff that have helped with this event. Komate, the Director of Communications, Alyssa Ventry, the Chief of Staff, Carolina Aranaba Fernandez, the Director of Galleries and Public Programs, Edward, Coma's partner in crime in communications. I see Mary Chu out here. I see Commissioner Seth Brenzel here, Mary Chu, Director of Public Programs. I see Jill Manton, a longtime member of the San Francisco Arts Commission. Thank you, Jill, for being here tonight. I see Lisa, I see Sarah, I see Coco, Eben Glenn, of course, who you saw, our new Deputy Director of Programs. Eben Glenn, thank you. As I did mention Sarah and Lisa and Coco. So if I haven't seen you or mentioned you, know that I love you. I thank you for being here. I'm really appreciative. And I want to leave you with this. I want to invite the audience to continue partnering with the San Francisco Arts Commission as we have these deep conversations. And these conversations are going to happen over the next 2 years. So we're going to go through the entire Bill of Rights. We're going to go through Amendments 13, 14, and 15, and we may tackle other subjects as well. But this is a part of culture. We're looking at, I'm the Director of Cultural Affairs for the city of San Francisco, the city and county of San Francisco, right? So as in that role, I take it seriously. This is not just some position on a hill where I'm like imperial and over all things high art and attending gallery openings and museums. I do that stuff, but I also attend community-based events. I also am out in the community, working in the community, doing things with the community, making sure that the community has a platform to have their voices heard. And when we're here, this is a platform for all of us to look at art and look at culture, more importantly, from a 30,000-foot level. Because why art is so important and why people are banning books and why they're banning programs and movies and all those kinds of things is because culture tells us who we are, who we were, and who we aspire to be. And that's what the other side, whoever that is so dreadfully afraid of. And so we have to keep our society open, keep our society free, and that's why these conversations are important. So thank you once again for joining us. Have a great weekend. Go out and work for democracy. Thank you.